This is Anthony Iannarino, and you're listening to In the Arena.
Step into the arena. Give it all that you got. Into the arena. It's time to make it your best shot. Chase the dream and break the scene. Your opportunity is right here. It's right here. It's right now. Welcome to my arena.
I'm fortunate enough to have Bob Burg with us today. Bob is a sought-after speaker for corporate conventions and entrepreneurial events. He's addressed audiences from 50 people to 16,000 people, even sharing the platform with a former U.S. president. Bob originally got started and was best known for his book, Endless Referrals. But over the past couple years, it's a book that he co-authored with John David Mann, The Go-Giver, that's really brought Bob to the forefront of thinking about what we do in sales and in business to create value. That book, interestingly enough, shot to number 6 on the Wall Street Journal 3 weeks after it was released, and it's Bob's 4th book to sell 250,000 copies. So the idea in here is extremely valuable. I could have easily run Bob down a path of talking about free market economics and libertarianism because he is an advocate and a defender of the free enterprise system. But it's this underlying belief about the amount of money and the amount of success one has being directly proportional to how many people they serve. That's sort of the foundation for some of this conversation, and it's one of the themes in The Go-Giver. So with that, let's listen to Bob tell us about how we can apply these ideas, some of them counterintuitive in The Go-Giver, to what we do to succeed today in business and in sales. Let's start with what I would call the counterintuitive premise of your book, The Go-Giver, and what that's built on. So as a salesperson, I've got a quota. I've got a number to meet. I'm being judged against a goal, and I'm not really being judged against the value that I create, at least by my sales manager. I certainly am by my clients. There's no question. So I'm a go-getter, and maybe to use your words, maybe I'm even a bit of a go-taker, because I've got to make a number, right? And so I'm maybe behaving aggressively. Tell me what it means to be a go-giver in contrast to what I just laid out, and why you believe it's a better strategy.
Well, I think that's a great question. And one reason why is, as you know, we always need to define our terms and check our premises whenever we're talking about anything anyway. So let's take go-getter, go-giver, go-taker. First of all, we love go-getters. You know, the title of the book is The Go-Giver because the premise of the story and of the message is that shifting your focus, and that's the key word, focus, shifting that focus from getting to giving. Now, in this case, when we say giving, we mean constantly and consistently providing value to others. And as you know, in a market-based economy, that's how you profit yourself, by focusing on providing value to others. There's no other way when people aren't forced to buy from you. So it is in your own best interest to focus on providing value, being of value to another person. Now, we love go-getters. Why? Well, because go-getters take action. They get things done. You've been a successful business person for many, many years, Anthony, and you know that you can have all the best ideas in the world, the best thoughts in the world, the best intention in the world. But without action being put into the mix, nothing's going to happen. It cannot happen by the very nature of the thing. So we love go-getters. Now, the cool thing is there's no natural division between a go-getter and a go-giver. Many go-getters are also go-givers, and every go-giver is also a go-getter. So again, bringing up that third term you use, the opposite of a go-giver is not a go-getter, it's a go-taker. Now, the go-taker is that person who feels almost entitled, if you will, to take without having added value to the person, to the process, to the situation. And I think we all know people like that, and they can be good people, but they tend to not accomplish the most that they could. They tend not to be as high a producer. And even when those times happen that they are, it's typically short-lived because they haven't based it on a foundation of value. When we say go-giver, we're simply talking about that man or woman who has learned, or perhaps always intuitively knew, that it is that person who can shift their focus, who can move from an I focus or a me focus to an other focus, okay? constantly focused on providing value to others, that's the person who accomplishes the most. Those make the best leaders, the greatest influence, and the over-the-top salespeople. If you have a quota to make, people aren't going to buy from you because you have a quota to reach. They're going to buy from you because you have something of value that they want more than the money that it would take to acquire it.
Do you think part of this, and sales has changed so much in the 2.5 decades that I've worked as a salesperson and as a business leader? And I think decades ago, though, we taught and trained salespeople to be closers, and it was about how do we claim value, and not so much about how do we create the value. And I've noticed that shift has been dramatic, and I think gaining speed. I always say the role of the salesperson is to create enough value that no one minds you claiming any. And Zig Ziglar says it, you can have anything you want if you help enough other people get what they want. But do you see that that's changed over the decades, that now this position that you're talking about is a more easily received and a more easily sold idea about what we do in sales?
Well, while I think basic principles stay the same, and I believe that those who are always the most successful salespeople, sure, they closed. I mean, they could close, but they also were great at establishing the relationship, and they understood that their success in closing was kind of based on the degree of their expertise in opening. So, in other words, what I'm saying is, so the degree that you've got that you always had that relationship established and cultivated, that was going to make it much easier to close the sale. It certainly used to be more transaction based, though, Anthony. I think there's no question about that. And what's great is that as technology has advanced, as the playing field has been equal, not only by the internet and so forth, but just through technology making products and services better. A lot of times you have a commodity. It doesn't mean it's not good. There's nothing wrong with the term commodity. It's simply it's that thing which is bought, sold, or traded, and that's fine. But what happens is most of the commodities now are pretty close to each other in quality. So what happens is it now is that salesperson who's got to be the difference. How do they communicate that value? Is it through excellence, consistency, attention, empathy, appreciation? How do they find a way to make themselves, even though really when you think of it, it's not about the sales. The sale isn't about the salesperson. It's about the prospect, the customer, the client. Yet the paradox is it still needs to be communicated by the salesperson correctly.
It's interesting because HR Challey, their research has shown that 38% of the decision that the client makes is based on the salesperson, and price is 17%. And so these ideas about caring and empathy and them feeling that you're going to own the outcome and help deliver that value really do matter now.
Anthony, unless your name happens to be Walmart, there's a good chance that making low price your unique selling proposition is not a good idea. And even if you have the lowest price, still don't make that the issue. The reason why is because if you make low price the issue rather than the value you're providing that they're receiving, you make low price the issue, you might get the sale, but it's only going to stick until someone else comes along with a cheaper price. That's why I like to say when you sell on price, you're a commodity. When you sell on value, you're a resource. And, of course, Charles Green, David Meister, they really, came up with that trusted advisor term and so forth. And see, when you're a trusted advisor, you're selling on value. You're not selling on price.
No doubt about it. Charlie's a smart guy, too. You
Sure.
brought up price, so let's talk about that, because in sales today, and I don't really think it matters very much what you sell anymore, you're going to be pressed on price. And I tell salespeople, it's incumbent upon the customer to ask. They're always going to ask about your price because that's their job. So I see a lot of salespeople disregard the second part of the equation. And you might talk about this in compensation, or you might talk about it using another rule. But I see a lot of salespeople disregard the part where they're allowed to capture some of the value that they create in the way of compensation and reciprocity. So there is some taking that comes to this. Can you share, and maybe this word's too strong for some people that are listening to this, can you share some of your ideas about what I would say your right is to capture some of the value you create when you create a ton of value?
Well, if I'm understanding it correctly, it's, do you have the right to make a profit if you're providing great value? Well, the word right is a one of those words that can be used because there's no right to it, but it's certainly if you're self-respecting, you're not going to be giving away your services, and you're not going to be underselling your services.
That's why I used the word right, because I was trying to provoke you.
Thank you, Anthony. You did that very well, my friend. Yeah. That's where we talk about the law of authenticity as the fourth law in the Go-Giver, which says the most valuable gift you have to offer is yourself. And in one part, we talk about, it's that all the sales skills in the world, the technical skills, people skills, as important as they are, and they're all for naught if you don't come at it from your true, authentic core. Okay. And that's true. But there's another part to this authenticity too. And that is having an understanding of the value you bring to the marketplace. See, in the story, Deborah Davenport learned that, who almost left her business because she didn't realize her unique value. Well, I believe as human beings, we all have two types of value. We have intrinsic value just by being born, but we also have market value. And that market value are those unique skills, talents, abilities that we bring to the marketplace that helps us to better serve our prospects, our customers, and our clients. Now, a lot of times we don't understand our own authentic market value. Why? Well, we're too close emotionally to ourselves. And we may have a particular talent, something that just comes natural, or maybe we put on those 10,000 hours of deliberate practice that Gladwell talks about in Outliers, or Jeff Colvin in the book Talent is Overrated, or maybe a combination of both, which it usually is. It's talent and practice, deliberate practice. But we get so good at it that we don't understand. We don't acknowledge it. We don't see it. Now, here, I can't tell you how many times I have mentored someone, and you've probably done the same thing, and I'm sure many listening and watching this have done the same, where I've been mentoring somebody who said who said something, and it was just terrific. It was wonderful. And I said, wow, that is brilliant. And they said, oh, no, everyone knows that, or everyone does it. And they weren't being falsely modest. They really didn't get that they had this unique value that they could bring the marketplace. And, so sometimes we just don't know because we're so close. And that's why it's important to either really look into it deeply or have a mentor, coach, or, whoever you are, a sales manager or somebody who's close enough to you, they can help you identify those talent strengths and values or unique value you bring, market value, but somebody who's far enough away that they're not emotionally attached as well.
Why do you think we discount our own value? And I see so many people who discount, like what you talked about, they discount their intrinsic value and the value that they can bring to clients, their market worth. And some of it, to me, it looks like it's just they're dealing with this inner critic, this idea that, well, I'm not special, other people are at least as good or better. And I sort of have the same experience that you do. When I look at them, you're completely unique. You have a tremendous ability to create value. And you should feel different about that than they do. But why do they suffer with that so much? If you have an idea on that.
My idea is that we all carry baggage with us. And in our belief systems, what Don Miguel Ruiz calls the agreements of the world, we all care. None of us are immune to it. We all care from the day we're born, from combination of upbringing, environment, schooling, media, television shows, movies, all these messages that we get from everything. Those are our thoughts and our feelings and our emotions, and we haven't safeguarded them, not until we get old enough to know better. And even then, we often don't. It's still unconscious. One of my favorite books, and a book that just helped me so dramatically, I read this 30 years ago, called Psycho-Cybernetics, written in 1960 by Dr. Maxwell Maltz. And I love the terrific job he did of explaining really how the mind works. And it's in attunement, it's in alignment, or it's attuned to what we believe is the truth about the way life is. Again, I call them beliefs or belief systems. Don Miguel Ruiz calls them agreements. And we're always like one of those self-seeking missiles. We're always going to course correct until we get to where we think we're supposed to be. And if that's a negative type of thing, that's where we're going to go. If it's a positive thing, that's where we're going to go. And fortunately, in his book, he also teaches us how to reprogram our mind to be able to do this. But I think it's something, Anthony, that if someone really feels themselves not a great friend of mine, Amy Wells, has a wonderful story which she calls "Walking in Her Value." She attended a seminar I did on this topic, and we were talking about the difference between price and value and how they're two different things. And she decided to walk in her value. She's in the she owns a wedding what do you call it? Where they sell wedding gowns and wedding dresses, and she decided she was going to. That's a very discount type business, and the first thing the bride and the mom, they come into the place and they say, "What's the discount I can get?" And now I was surprised to hear that, because you think, well, that's a pretty big day. You wouldn't think price is the issue, but the industry has trained their consumers to focus on price, so that's what they do. So she said, after she heard this difference, she said she was going to begin walking in her value. So she told her team, from now on, they are not discounting the prices at all. They're selling the dresses at full price, but they're going to much better communicate their value. They understood that first they had to get together and determine, what is that value? You've got to communicate your value to yourself before you can communicate it to someone else. And there were a lot of advantages she had from being in the business so long, having certain connections, being very well networked. And so the great story is the first person comes in, and a young bride-to-be with her mom, and the mom was very kind of headstrong and very demanding. And Amy had sent her team member to help her, and the team member came back upset. "Oh, Amy, she's not happy about this. She wants to talk to you." And Amy went out there, and the woman said, the mom said, "Amy, I'm very disappointed in you. I was expecting more from you than this." And Amy, who's just the nicest person you can imagine, she said, "Well, you're expecting more from me than this, and more from me than this you're going to receive. I'm going to give you 19 years of my experience in this business. I'm going to give you," and she named a couple other benefits that are pretty exclusive to Amy and the way Amy can provide value. Then she looks at the bride, starts to primp the bride, looks back at the mom and says, and most of all, "I'm going to give you delivery of the perfect dress for the perfect day that your daughter has dreamed about her entire life." Well, the next morning, Amy gets a call from an excited bride-to-be who says, Amy, my mother said that not only are we to buy the dress from you, but instead of the 50% deposit, I'm to pay you the entire amount up front." So because Amy, I believe, respected herself and understood her own value, she was able to communicate this to the mom, who is much more interested in the value of what the person can bring rather than saving a few dollars. Well, then a couple of weeks later, Amy gets a call from a young girl who says, "Amy, I'm going to be getting married. I want to make an appointment with you." And Amy says, "Oh, well, I'd be delighted. How did you hear of me?" And she says, "Oh, my aunt said you're the only one I can buy this from." "Oh, who's your aunt?" Well, it turns out to be that mom. So not only does Amy now have a great customer, but Amy now has a personal walking ambassador. Now, interesting. I'd say, well, but if she charges full price, isn't she going to lose some sales? Sure, she will sometimes, but she'll more than make up for it in the additional profit, which she should make. And she's now attracting the type of customers she wants. See, when someone refers someone to Amy, they let that person know you're not going to get a discount. You're going to pay full price, but you are going to get such spectacular, immense, exceptional value. It's going to be worth it. And Amy, since that time, has made upwards of $10,000 a month profit from making this adjustment and doing what she calls walking in her value.
Such an important concept. You gave people two good book titles in there. Four Agreements by Ruiz is a wonderful book for thinking about these agreements. It's one of my favorites. I read it 3 times last year. And the second one, Maxwell Maltz, Psycho-Cybernetics, just another great mind shift book. When you read it, you can see all of sort of the things that you've done to yourself over time and how to unwind some of that. Let me deal with one more of your 5 laws, influence. I see people in sales and in business just generally, and they're looking for shortcuts to influence. They're looking for something tactical to make them influential. And I don't think it's really tactics. What do you think influence is really made up of?
Well, influence, when you get right down to the definition, influence can be defined as the ability to move a person or persons to a desired action, usually within the context of a specific goal. We could also say that influence is an unseen flow of power. But, and they're both correct definitions. But I think what influence really is more than anything else, Anthony, is pull. It's not push. You never hear, wow, that Anthony's so influential. He has a lot of push with people. No, it's Anthony has a lot of pull, because that's what it is. See, influence is pull. It's an attraction. People who are great influencers attract people to themselves and to their ideas. They do this through a combination of, as Stephen M.R. Covey, who wrote Dr. Stephen Covey's son from Seven Habits, Stephen M.R. Covey wrote
Speed of Trust,
and his newest book is Smart Trust. Both wonderful, wonderful books. And he says that trust is a matter of the dictionary definition of trust is the assured reliance on the character, ability, strength, and or truth of someone or something. Stephen Covey just says character and competence being the two main things, and I think he's right. Now, how do you communicate your character? It's obviously it's not what you say, although what you say is also important, but that's probably the least effective way. It's important, it's certainly what you do is very powerful, but I think in a sense you really communicate influence by who you are. And that's why the third law of the Go-Giver, the law of influence, says your influence is determined by how abundantly you place other people's interests first. Now, this sounds kind of counterintuitive, but this is how the top leaders, great influencers, and over-the-top successful sales producers, this is how they run their life. Now, it's very important to qualify this by saying when we say place other people's interests first, we're not suggesting you be anybody's doormat or martyr or self-sacrificial in any way, not at all. It's as one of the mentors in the story told the protege Joe, the golden rule of business, and I've been saying this for years, and that is all things being equal or even close enough to equal, people will do business with and refer business to those people they know, like, and trust. And there's no faster, more powerful, or more effective way to elicit those feelings toward you and others than by stepping outside yourself, moving to look at how you can serve that other person.
Such smart wisdom there. I appreciate that. I'm writing a book right now, Influence is the capstone of part one, and it's really made up of all the attributes that are difficult to obtain, and caring and empathy, emotional intelligence, and these things that we don't place enough of a premium on in my mind, but that really do make influence. And I say it a little bit different, but the same thing. All things being equal, relationships win, and all things being unequal, relationships still probably win. Because if I know you and I trust you and I like you and I know what I'm going to buy, I know the value that you create and what you're going to bring to it, it's easy to say yes. Let me ask you one final question. If people are listening to this and they say, I like these ideas, they appeal to me, I will recommend they go buy the book if they haven't already. And a lot of people have already bought that book, as you well know. But what would be the one or two recommendations that you would make for somebody to apply these ideas to their sales game or their business game right away?
Well, first, like the mentor, the main mentor, Pindar, in the story said to Joe, the one condition of mentorship was that he had to actually take action and apply the laws that he learned that night. Now, we have people writing to us quite often. Some of them do it that night. Others do one a week, or they take it at whatever pace they choose. But I think the important part is apply the laws. Not that you can't question, you certainly can, but don't try to look at why they won't work. Look at why they will, and do that effectively. But I think action is so key.
Yeah, I recommend to salespeople to share ideas with prospects, and they think ideas are made for clients, but I think that you have to make these deposits of value so that you're known as a value creator. And if you say, I'm going to withhold value until you pay me first, then you're sort of going against the law of the Go-Giver at the beginning.
Well, it does. And it does. It's sort of like going to a fireplace and saying, sure, I'll throw on some, first you give me some heat, then I'll throw on some wood, newspapers, light a match. It's like going to the bank and saying, give me some interest payment first, and then I'll make a deposit. No, it doesn't work that way. That's why the first law is the law of value. You need to begin the process. It's the last law, the fifth law, that is the law of receptivity.
The wood burning stove always wins in that when you're standing in front of the wood burning stove shivering. The wood burning stone always gets the wood first every time. Thanks so much for sharing with us. I appreciate your time, and I'm a big fan, and I appreciate you sharing so much with us here.
I'm a great fan of yours, Anthony. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I love what Bob does. I love the underlying premises in the book, The Go-Giver. It's absolutely worth your going out and purchasing on Amazon.com and digging into. You can find Bob at bobburg.com. Definitely go buy the book. Also, you might pick up the 4 Agreements and Maxwell Maltz Psychocybernetics, 2 things to really help you get your mind around some of these ideas. As always, you can find me at thesalesblog.com. Do sign up for the newsletter if you get there. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you next week in the arena.